Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, dear listener, there was a moment in time when everything felt connected. Every word that came down carried meaning. Every revelation brought clarity. Every moment strengthened the bond between the heavens and the earth. The Prophet ﷺ was not just receiving words, he was receiving guidance, direction, reassurance. A connection so powerful that it shaped everything around him. And then it stopped. Now pause for a moment and truly feel that shift. Imagine being in a state where you are constantly connected, where guidance comes to you, where you know that Allah is speaking to you through revelation. And suddenly, without warning, that connection becomes silent. No new verses, no new words, just stillness. This was not a small change. This was not something that could be ignored, because revelation was not just information, it was comfort, it was reassuring, it was a constant reminder that Allah was near, that everything had purpose, that every step was guided, and now there was nothing. Now think about what that silence would feel like, not just externally but internally, the intidhar, the waiting, the anticipation that something would come, but it did not. Days passed, time moved forward, but the revelation did not return. And this is where the emotional weight begins to build, because silence, especially after connection, feels different. It is not just the absence of sound, it is the absence of something you were used to, something that brought clarity, something that gave you direction. Now reflect on your own life. There are moments when you feel close to Allah, when everything feels aligned, when your heart feels connected, when your dua feels strong, when your understanding feels clear. And then there are moments where that feeling fades, where things feel quiet, where you do not feel the same connection. And in those moments, a question begins to form. What changed? This was not just anyone experiencing this silence. This was the Prophet ﷺ, the one chosen to receive revelation, the one whose connection with Allah was unlike any other. And even he experienced a moment where that connection felt paused. Now pause and reflect on that deeply, because it changes how you understand your own experiences. If even the Prophet ﷺ experienced a moment of waiting, a moment where revelation did not come, then what does that say about your own moments of silence? But before that answer becomes clear, you have to stay in this moment. Feel the stillness, because this was not just a pause, it was a test, not of faith in the sense of doubt, but of patience, of endurance, of remaining steady even when something you are used to is no longer present. Now imagine the days passing. Each day carries the same expectation. Maybe today it will come, maybe now, maybe soon. But the silence remained, and with every passing moment, the weight of that silence became heavier. Because the longer something is absent, the more noticeable that absence becomes. And this is where the question begins to rise. Why? Why would revelation stop? Why would something so essential, so central suddenly pause? Was it a delay? Was it a test? Or was it something else entirely? These are the kinds of questions that begin to form when silence stretches longer than expected. And this is where the story truly begins. Because what felt like an absence was not actually abandonment, but that truth was not yet visible. At this point, there was only silence, and that silence was about to carry a lesson that would not only shape that moment, but speak to every heart that has ever felt distant, every person who has ever wondered why things suddenly became quiet. Because sometimes, silence is not the end of connection. It is the beginning of understanding. The silence did not pass quickly, it lingered. Day after day, the intidhar remained. The hope that revelation would return did not fade, but it was tested. Because when something you are used to suddenly stops, the first reaction is not acceptance, it is waiting. Maybe today, maybe now, maybe soon, But the moments passed and the silence remained unchanged. Now pause and feel that deeply. This was not just a pause in communication. This was a pause in something that brought comfort, clarity, and reassurance. Revelation was not only guidance for others, it was also a source of strength for the Prophet ﷺ himself. Every verse that came down carried meaning, but it also carried support. A reminder that Allah was near, that everything had purpose, that every step was guided, and now that feeling was not present in the same way. Now think about what that creates internally, no doubt in Allah, not uncertainty in the truth, but a deep longing, a feeling of missing something that had become part of your life, something that gave you strength, now absent. This is where loneliness begins to form. Not loneliness in the sense of being alone among people, but a deeper kind, a spiritual stillness, a moment where the heart waits for something it cannot bring back on its own. Now reflect on your own experience. There are times when you feel connected, when your prayers feel meaningful, when your heart feels alive, when your relationship with Allah feels strong. And then there are times when that feeling fades, when your dua feels different, when your heart feels heavy, when the connection does not feel as close as it once did. And in those moments, you begin to feel something similar, a quiet loneliness, not because Allah is absent, but because your feeling of closeness is not the same. This is exactly the kind of moment that was unfolding. The Prophet ﷺ knew that Allah had not abandoned him. His certainty was not shaken, but the absence of revelation still carried weight. It still created a feeling that could not be ignored, because being certain of something does not remove the emotional experience of waiting. Now pause and reflect on that. You can believe something with complete certainty and still feel the impact of a difficult moment. You can trust Allah and still feel the weight of silence. These two things are not contradictions, they exist together. And this is what makes this moment so powerful, because it shows you that even the strongest iman does not remove human emotion. It does not make you feel anything. It does not turn you into someone who is unaffected by what you experience. Instead, it shapes how you respond to it. Now imagine the days continuing. The routine remains. Life continues. But something is missing. Something that once brought clarity is not there. And in that space, the heart waits, not with impatience, but with longing, not with doubt, but with hope. Because hope is what keeps you steady in moments like this. The belief that what has paused will return, that what feels distant will come back. But until that happens, the waiting itself becomes the experience. And this is where the emotional depth increases, because waiting is not easy, especially when you do not know when it will end, especially when there is no clear answer to when things will change. Now bring this back to your own life again. How often do you find yourself in a state of waiting? Waiting for something to change, waiting for clarity, waiting for a feeling to return. And in that waiting, your heart goes through different states. Sometimes strong, sometimes heavy, sometimes hopeful, sometimes tired. This is part of the human experience. This moment shows you that even the Prophet ﷺ experienced something similar. Not in the same way as you, but in a way that carries a shared understanding. That waiting is part of the journey. That silence is not always immediate in its meaning. That sometimes the absence of something teaches you something deeper than its presence. But as the waiting continued, something else began to happen. It was not just the internal experience, it was what came from the outside. Because when silence appears, people begin to speak, and what they say can carry a weight of its own. The silence was already heavy, but then something else was added to it. People began to speak. At first, it may not have seemed significant. Words are always there. Conversations continue. Opinions are shared. But in a moment like this, when something important has paused, those words begin to carry more weight. Because when people do not understand something, they try to explain it. And when they do not have the truth, They fill that space with assumptions. This is exactly what began to happen. The pause in revelation did not go unnoticed. Those around the Prophet ﷺ observed it. They saw that no new verses were coming. They saw that the connection that once seemed continuous had become silent. And instead of waiting, instead of reflecting, they began to interpret, but not with sincerity, with mockery. Now pause and imagine that moment. You are already in a state of waiting. You are already feeling the weight of silence. And now, on top of that, people begin to speak about you, not to understand, but to question, not to support, but to challenge. Some began to say that his Lord had left him. Others suggested that he had been abandoned. And these were not quiet thoughts. These were words spoken openly, words meant to create doubt, words meant to weaken the message. Now reflect on how powerful words can be, because even if you are certain of something, even if your iman is strong, hearing people speak in this way adds pressure, not because you believe them, but because you are human. You hear, you feel, you experience the impact of what is being said around you. And this is where the situation becomes more intense, because it is no longer just internal, it is external as well. The silence inside and the noise outside. Now think about that contrast. Inside, there is waiting, patience, longing for revelation. Outside, there is mockery, assumptions, clam that carries negativity. This creates a unique kind of pressure. Because you are holding on to something you know is true, while being surrounded by voices that try to suggest otherwise. Now bring this back to your own life. Have you ever been in a situation where you were already struggling internally, and then people around you made it harder? Where you were already waiting for something, already dealing with something, and then others added doubt, criticism, or negativity? That feeling is not easy, because it creates tension from two directions, what you feel inside and what you hear outside. This is exactly what was happening. The Prophet ﷺ did not doubt Allah, but hearing people say such things, hearing the message being mocked, hearing assumptions being spread, this adds to the emotional weight of the moment. Because even when your belief is firm, your heart still feels. Now pause and reflect on that deeply. Strength does not mean you are unaffected by what people say. It means you remain firm despite it. And this is what makes this moment powerful, because it shows you that even the Prophet ﷺ experienced a situation where people spoke in a way that could have shaken someone else, where the environment was not supportive but challenging. And yet he remained patient, not reacting to every word, not allowing the noise to control him, but continuing to wait, continuing to hold on to what he knew to be true. Now think about how difficult that is, to remain steady when people around you are not, to hold on to certainty when others are spreading doubt, to stay patient when both silence and clam are pressing on you at the same time. This is not easy. And this is why this moment matters, because it shows you that pressure is not always just internal. Sometimes it comes from what people say, from how they react, from how they interpret your situation. And in those moments, you have a choice: to be affected by the noise, or to remain grounded in what you know. Now, as the silence continued, and as the words of people spread, the situation reached a point where something had to change, not because of the pressure, but because of the plan. Because what felt like absence was about to be replaced with something powerful, not just a return, but a response that would not only answer the silence, but also silence the clam of those who spoke without understanding. Because when revelation returned, it did not come quietly. It came with words that carried comfort, clarity, and a message that would reach far beyond that moment. Then, after the silence, it returned. Not gradually, not in a way that eased in slowly, but in a moment that changed everything at once. Revelation came back. Now pause and feel that shift. After days of waiting, after the weight of silence, after the clam of people and the internal longing, the connection was restored. But what made this moment truly powerful was not just that revelation returned. It was how it returned, because the first words were not random. They were precise, they were direct, and they carried something that went straight to the heart of everything that had been felt. By the morning brightness, and by the night when it becomes still. Now reflect on that opening: light and darkness, movement and stillness. This is not just a poetic beginning. It is a reflection of the exact experience that had just taken place. The brightness of the morning, representing clarity, renewal, the return of light after darkness, and the stillness of the night, representing the silence, the pause, the moment where everything felt quiet and uncertain. Now think about how powerful that is. Before even addressing the situation directly, the words set a scene. A reminder that both states exist, that brightness and darkness are part of the same reality, that silence is not separate from connection, but part of its cycle. And then came the words that answered everything. Your Lord has not abandoned you, nor has he disliked you. Now pause here, because this is the moment where everything becomes clear. Every thought, every feeling, every word that had been spoken by others, all of it is answered in one sentence: not abandoned, not disliked. This was not just reassurance, this was a correction. Correction of what people had said, correction of what might have been felt in the silence, a direct statement that removes every doubt, every assumption, every misunderstanding. Now reflect on how direct this is. It does not leave space for interpretation. It does not come with ambiguity. It addresses the exact concern that existed, because people had said that he was abandoned, and Allah responded by saying the opposite, clearly, firmly, without hesitation. Now imagine hearing that, after waiting, after feeling the silence, after hearing what people were saying, to receive words that directly remove every doubt. This is not just relief. This is comfort at a level that goes beyond words, because it is not coming from people, it is coming from Allah. Now think about the emotional impact of that. The silence was not rejection. The pause was not abandonment. The delay was not a sign of distance. It was something else, something that had a purpose. And now that purpose begins to reveal itself, because the words do not stop there. They continue, and the hereafter is better for you than the first, and your Lord is going to give you, and you will be satisfied. Now reflect on this shift, from addressing the past to pointing toward the future, from explaining what just happened to promising what is coming next. This is how reassurance works. It does not only remove doubt, it replaces it with hope. Now think about your own life. When you go through a moment of silence, when you feel distant, when things do not make sense, what you need is not just an explanation. You need reassurance. You need to know that what you feel does not mean what you think it means, that the silence is not rejection, that the delay is not abandonment. And this is exactly what these verses do. They take a moment that feels heavy and they transform it into something meaningful. Now pause and reflect on the contrast again. Silence. And then Kalam Allah. Waiting, and then clarity. Uncertainty, and then direct reassurance. This is what makes this moment so powerful, because it shows you that when Allah responds, He does not respond partially. He responds completely. He addresses what was said. He addresses what was felt. And He provides something that removes doubt and replaces it with certainty. Now the silence is no longer just silence. It becomes part of the story, part of a lesson, part of something that carries meaning far beyond that moment. Because what was revealed in Surah Ad-Duha was not only for the Prophet ﷺ, it was for every person who would ever feel that same kind of silence, every person who would ever wonder if distance means abandonment, every person who would ever need to hear those same words, that you are not forgotten, that you are not abandoned. and that what feels like silence may actually be something preparing you for what comes next. And this is where the deeper message begins. Now that the words of Surah Ad-Duha have been revealed, the silence begins to make sense. What once felt like absence is now understood as something else entirely. Not rejection, not distance, but a moment with purpose. Because the message of this surah is not just about what happened, it is about what it means. Now pause and reflect on the core of what was said. Your Lord has not abandoned you, nor has he disliked you. This is not just a statement for that moment, it is a principle, a truth that extends far beyond that time. Because one of the deepest fears a person can feel is this, that they have been forgotten, that they have been left, that the silence they are experiencing means something is wrong. And this is exactly what Allah addresses directly. Not abandoned, not disliked. Now think about how many times you have felt something similar, moments where things feel quiet, where your dua does not feel the same, where your connection feels weaker than it once did. And in those moments, a question slowly forms. Why does it feel like this? Why does it feel distant? Did I do something wrong? Or is Allah no longer close to me? Now pause and reflect on that honestly, because even if you do not say it out loud, you have felt it. That quiet doubt, that subtle fear that the silence means something negative, that it is a sign of rejection. But this is exactly what Surah Ad-Duha corrects. Your silence is not rejection. Let that sink in. Because this is where most people misunderstand their spiritual journey. They measure their relationship with Allah based on how they feel in a moment. If they feel close, they assume everything is good. If they feel distant, they assume something is wrong. But your feelings are not always the truth. They change, they rise and fall, they respond to your environment, your actions, your state of mind. But Allah does not change. Your Lord has not abandoned you. Now reflect on how powerful that is when applied to your own life, that moment where you felt nothing, that moment where your dua felt empty, that moment where your heart felt distant. None of that means you were abandoned. It means you were in a moment that has a purpose, even if you cannot see it immediately. Now think about why silence exists at all. If everything was always clear, always emotionally strong, always full of feeling, you would never be tested. You would never learn patience. You would never experience what it means to hold on to your faith without relying on emotion. Because real connection is not built only on feeling, it is built on consistency, on choosing to turn to Allah even when you do not feel it, continuing to pray even when your heart feels heavy, on making dua even when it feels quiet. This is where your strength is developed, not in moments of ease, but in moments of silence. Now reflect on this deeply. The silence you experience is not empty, it is active, it is shaping you, it is teaching you something that constant ease never could. And this is exactly what happened in that moment of revelation. The silence came first, then the reassurance, then the understanding. And now that same pattern exists in your life. You experience the silence, then you search for meaning. And when you understand it correctly, you realize that it was never distant. It was preparation. Now think about how this changes your perspective. Instead of fearing silence, you begin to see it differently, not as something negative, but as something meaningful, something that carries a purpose you may not fully understand yet. Because if Allah responded to the Prophet ﷺ with reassurance after silence, then what does that tell you about your own situation? That your silence is not permanent, that your moment of distance is not the end, that what you feel now does not define your entire relationship with Allah. And this is where hope becomes real, not based on emotion, but based on truth, because the same words that were revealed then still apply now. Your Lord has not abandoned you. Now let that settle in your heart, because once you truly understand this, something changes. You stop measuring your faith based on feelings alone. You stop assuming the worst when things feel quiet. And you begin to trust that even in silence, Allah is still near, still aware, still guiding in ways you may not see yet. So the next time you feel that silence, do not rush to label it. Do not assume it means rejection. Instead, remember this moment, remember the story, remember the words, and hold on to the truth that silence is not the absence of connection, it is part of it.